As the chairman committee, Chairman Zimmerman for independent statement.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley. Today's hearing is extraordinary. To hold a joint committee hearing. It's even more extraordinary than a single CEO testified before nearly half of the United States Senate. But then Facebook is pretty extraordinary. More than 2 billion people use Facebook every month. 1.4 billion people use it every day. More than the population of any country on earth except China, and more than 4 times the population of the United States. It's also more than 1,500 times the population of my home state of South Dakota. Plus, roughly 45% of American adults report getting at least some of their news from Facebook.
There's a guy named whose last name is Dog.
Facebook's incredible reach.
I kid you not.
We're here because of what you, Mr. Zuckerberg, have described as a breach of trust. A quiz app used by approximately 300,000 people led to information about 87 million Facebook users being obtained by the company Cambridge Analytica. There are plenty of questions about the behavior of Cambridge Analytica, and we expect to hold a future hearing on Cambridge and similar firms. But as you said, this is not likely to be an isolated incident, a fact demonstrated by Facebook's suspension of another firm just this past weekend. You promised that when Facebook discovers other apps that had access to large amounts of user data, you will ban them until those affected. And that's appropriate. But it's unlikely to be enough for the 2 billion Facebook users. One reason that so many people are worried about this incident is what it says about how Facebook works. The idea that for every person who decided to try an app, information about nearly 300 other people was scraped from your services, to put it mildly, disturbing. And the fact that those 87 million people may have technically consented to making their data available doesn't make most people feel any better. The recent revelation that malicious actors were able to utilize Facebook's default privacy settings to match email addresses and phone numbers found on the so-called dark web to public Facebook profiles, potentially affecting all Facebook users, only adds fuel to the fire. What binds these two incidents is that they don't appear to be caused by the kind of negligence that allows typical data breaches to happen. Instead, they both appear to be the result of people exploiting the very tools that you've created to manipulate users' information. I know Facebook has taken several steps and intends to take more to address these issues. Nevertheless, some have warned that the actions Facebook is taking to ensure that third parties don't obtain data from unsuspecting users, while necessary, will actually serve to enhance Facebook's own ability to market such data exclusively. Most of us understand that whether you're using Facebook or Google or some other online services, we are trading certain information about ourselves for free or low-cost services. But for this model to persist, both sides of the bargain need to know the stakes that are involved. Right now, I'm not convinced that Facebook's users have the information that they need to make meaningful choices. In the past, many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have been willing to defer to tech companies' efforts to regulate themselves. But this may be changing. Just last month, in overwhelming bipartisan fashion, Congress voted to make it easier for prosecutors and victims to go after websites that knowingly facilitate sex trafficking. This should be a wake-up call for the tech community. We want to hear more, without delay, about what Facebook and other companies plan to do to take greater responsibility for what happens on their platforms. How will you protect users' data? How will you inform users about the changes that you are making? And how do you intend to proactively stop harmful conduct instead of being forced to respond to it months or years later? Mr. Zuckerberg, in many ways, you and the company that you've created, the story that you've created, represent the American dream. Many are incredibly inspired by what you've done. At the same time, you have an obligation, and it's up to you, to ensure that that dream doesn't become a privacy nightmare for the scores of people who use Facebook. This hearing is an opportunity to speak to those who believe in Facebook and to those who are deeply skeptical about it. We're listening, America is listening, and quite possibly the world is listening too.
Thank you. Now, Ranking Member Feinstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Grassley, Chairman Thune. Thank you both for holding this hearing. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for being here. You have a real opportunity this afternoon to lead the industry and demonstrate a meaningful commitment to protecting individual privacy. We have learned over the past few months, and we've learned a great deal that's alarming. We've seen how foreign actors are abusing social media platforms like Facebook to interfere in elections and take millions of Americans' personal information without their knowledge in order to manipulate public opinion and target individual voters. Specifically, on February the 16th, Special Counsel Mueller issued an indictment against the Russia-based Internet Research Agency and 13 of its employees for interfering operations targeting the United States. Through 470 Facebook accounts and pages. The campaign included ads and false information to create discord and harm Secretary Clinton's campaign. And the content was seen by an estimated 157 million Americans. A month later, on March 17th, news broke that Cambridge Analytica exploited the personal information of approximately 50 million Facebook users without their knowledge or permission. And last week, we learned that number was even higher, 87 million Facebook users who had their private information taken without their consent. Specifically, using a personality quiz he created, Professor Kogan collected the personal information of 300,000 Facebook users and then collected data on millions of their friends. It appears the information collected included everything these individuals had on their Facebook pages, and according to some reports, even included private direct messages between users. Professor Kogan is said to have taken data from over 70 million Americans. It has also been reported that he sold this data to Cambridge Analytica for $800,000. Cambridge Analytica then took this data and created a psychological welfare tool to influence United States elections. In fact, the CEO, Alexander Nix, declared that Cambridge Analytica ran all the digital campaign, the television campaign, and
we are going to continue to listen to the opening statements, but in the meantime, Sarah Sanders at the White House just started her press briefing, and we'll turn it over to her as well.
Just one more question, Sarah. If the president did not communicate a fair, then why did he instruct?
I'm going to move on to Kristen. Sorry, we were tight on time with the visit of the Alabama team coming up soon.
Well, just could you follow up on that question? Does he continue to deny having an affair? Then why doesn't he just?
The president's been clear. He's addressed this several times. I don't have anything else to add. Brian?
Sarah, let me ask my other question. Can you just say definitively, has the president had any conversations about firing Jeff Sessions, Rod Rosenstein, or Robert Mueller in the past 24 hours?
I haven't had any conversations with him on that. I can't speak beyond that. Sorry, Kristen, we've got to keep going.
We called it a witch hunt, but Rod Rosenstein, who he appointed, signed off on the probe.
Do it.
Go ahead.
I answer her. Go ahead, Kristen.
Can you just answer the question? If the president appointed Rod Rosenstein, and so how can he call the raid yesterday a witch hunt when it was approved by the Deputy Attorney General he appointed?
Once again, I'm not aware of what the process is and who signs off on those specific types of things. The president certainly has been very clear about what his position is when it comes to matters of collusion, and that's what his reference is. He thinks this entire thing is a witch hunt. I think we've spoken about this at length, at nauseum, and frankly think it's a big distraction that the media has spent every single day for the last year focused on this instead of some of the biggest issues of our day and some of the biggest issues that the president is dealing with, like Syria, like North Korea, like deregulation, tax cuts, defeating ISIS. That's the focus of this administration, and frankly, that's what you guys should spend a little bit more time on. Hey guys, time out. We're going to you yielded your time to Kristen. I'm going to go to John.
Please, if I
Sorry.
may, just a follow-up.
All right, I'll come back to you, Brian, for one.
Thanks. You had said that
I'm feeling generous
Thank you.
for Nadia's birthday.
Just two quick ones. You said that it's a witch hunt, and you continue to characterize it as that. But as much as this administration also has leveled sanctions against the 13 Russians that were indicted by the Mueller investigation, in some point, are you a party to this witch hunt, or is some of it at least a legitimate effort?
Just because there may have been involvement by Russia doesn't mean there was involvement by the Trump campaign. And to try to conflate the two is insane.
No, that's not the question. The question is, in some ways, aren't you at least supporting what they've done? Because they've indicted some of the people that you have leveled sanctions against. So you're in agreement with Mueller in at least some regards, right?
We've been outspoken on a number of occasions that we think that Russia was involved in election meddling, and we've taken actions because of that. But that has nothing to do with whether or not the president and his campaign had anything to do with that.
And then
I'm not sorry. I'm going to keep moving. John, I called on John before. Guys, one at a time. Go ahead, John.
Thanks a lot, Sarah.
Sorry, right here.
Thanks a lot, Sarah.
What is crazy today?
What is the nature of the president's relationship right now with Attorney General Jeff Sessions? He really voices his pleasure with him last evening in his remarks. Is it a good relationship? Does he risk being fired right now?
I think the president was pretty clear about his frustrations when he spoke about that last night. Michael?
One other one, real quick, Sarah, if you don't mind. It's about the EPA administrator, Mr. Pruitt. If it turns out that he lied in the interview that he gave with Fox News, my colleague Ed Henry, would that be problematic for him in terms of holding on to his job?
I'm not going to get into hypothetical situations, but certainly the president would expect all members of his cabinet to be honest and certainly open with the public. Michael?
So the president last night seemed to combine his reaction to the Russia investigation, which we've heard him say before, and this new investigation that has grown out of the raids in New York of his attorney. Does he view that as one and the same investigation? In other words, does he think that's all kind of under the umbrella of the special counsel, or does he view the Russia investigation as separate from the probe into the payments by these women that is apparently being conducted by the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York?
I think certainly that they are separate investigations, but I think that publicly they have been conflated quite a bit.
Yes, Sarah. Does the United States expect that in a response to the Syria chemical weapons attack that other nations will join in? Specifically, we're seeing indications from France and the Saudis that they may also take military action.
We've had a number of conversations, both the president with President Macron, Prime Minister May, and at various other levels, not just with those countries, but others at an administration level. And we're going to continue to work with a number of our partners and allies as we determine what the next best steps are. April?
Sarah, two questions. The president said yesterday he was compliant. They turned over 1 million documents. If he was compliant with these investigations, why was there a search warrant needed?
This doesn't have anything to do with the president. I would refer you to Michael Cohen and his attorney. When it comes to matters of the special counsel and dealings with the president, we've been fully cooperative.
Okay, and next question. With all of this turmoil, particularly this last week, has the president at any time thought about stepping down before or now?
No, and I think that's an absolutely ridiculous question. I gave you 2 questions, April. We're moving on. Jordan, go ahead.
It's not ridiculous.
Thanks, Sarah. Did the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, force Tom Bossert out of the job?
I'm not going to get into specific details about the ongoings of personnel, but I can tell you that he resigned. The president feels he's done a great job and wishes him the best as he moves forward.
Sarah, the president tweeted favorably today about some of the promises that President Xi has made toward instituting some market reforms in China, but he's said this before. Is this going to be enough to avert some of these tariffs that the president's been talking about instituting?
Certainly, we are encouraged by President Xi's words and his kind words. But at the same time, we want to see concrete actions from China. We're going to continue moving forward in the process and in the negotiations until those happen. Pamela?
Has the president spoken with Michael Cohen since the raids?
Not that I'm aware of.
Let's ask you, you said that he believes he views this as sort of crossing the line. Can you explain a little bit more why these raids on his personal attorney is viewed by the president as crossing the line?
I don't have anything else to add on that front right now. Right here from the front.
You said earlier, you said the president believes he has the power to fire Robert Mueller because usually most legal experts believe that he would have to order Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein to fire Mueller, and Rosenstein could, of course, refuse.
I know a number of individuals in the legal community, and including at the Department of Justice, that he has the power to do so, but I don't have any further announcements on it.
They said that it is, so they told me, I've asked, they've said that it's Rod Rosenstein oversees special counsel and only he has the power to fire the special counsel.
Again, we've been advised that the president certainly has the power to make that decision. I can't go anything beyond that. Dave?
British government said they're still looking for confirmation that Assad used chemical weapons last weekend. Is the president still looking for confirmation of that?
I can't get into specific classified information, but I can tell you we feel confident in the comments that we've made up until this point. John?
Thank you, Sarah. 2 questions with brevity on Ambassador Bolton. With the
We'll believe it when we see it, right?
resignations of Michael Anton and now Tom Bossert, can we expect any other changes of personnel in his family?
I don't have any other personnel announcements to make at this time. We'll certainly keep you guys posted.
Right. A year ago, Ambassador Bolton was highly critical in op-ed pages about U.S. involvement with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. With the World Bank IMF meeting coming up within a matter of 2 weeks, is his position going to affect U.S. support for either institution?
I don't have any policy changes on that front at this time and don't expect any on that front. Francesca?
Yesterday, President Trump said something very interesting about Syria. He said that because of the power of the United States and because of the power of our country, we're able to stop it. Now, with bringing in Ambassador John Bolton as well, which is sort of a signal of a more hawkish stance potentially, I want to know if the president has changed his calculus in any way on Syria and on whether or not he wants to pull out those troops very soon, as he previously said.
I addressed the troops yesterday. I don't have anything new on that front in terms of things that the president may or may not do. We're not going to broadcast, and I don't have any announcements on that front. Fred? Fred?
Oh, thanks, sir. This week, Senator McConnell said they're taking up 6 nominations, and they're going to continue taking up 6 nominations per week. Do you consider that a major breakthrough for the administration? Considering there's
we'd like to see them take on a lot more than 6, but we're certainly glad to see those 6 move forward. But we'd like to see them move forward in a much bigger fashion than just the single digits right now.
And one other question on U.S. Attorney Berman. He's in an interim position now in New York. Reports have been that the president was going to nominate him for full-time. Is that still the case? Will the president nominate him?
I don't have any personnel announcements on that front. Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah. So all of the evidence so far in the Syrian chemical attack points to the use of chlorine gas. The Assad regime has been suspected of using chlorine multiple times on the battlefield. What makes this particular attack different and warrant the international response and the potential use of lethal force that we're seeing from this president?
I can't address specific intelligence matters, but I think everyone around the world can see why these recent attacks are so horrific. Beyond that, I can't get into any other details. Eamon?
Thanks, Sarah. To clarify your comment here on Xi Jinping's speech last night, it was seen as rhetoric around trade openness. Are you saying that the president didn't see anything in that speech that would encourage him to back off on his threat to impose tariffs on the Chinese?
We certainly think it's a step.
All right, that's been Sarah Sanders at the White House briefing room. A busy day on both ends of Capitol Hill and the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue. Let's now go to Mark Zuckerberg. He is about to take the swear that he will tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The members of the Senate, the chairman and ranking members, have been taking turns with their opening statements. Senator Nelson is about to wrap that up now, and then we will have Mark Zuckerberg giving his first testimony.
and you will rightfully have some hard questions for me to answer. Before I talk about the steps we're taking to address them, I want to talk about how we got here. Facebook is an idealistic and optimistic company. For most of our existence, we focused on all of the good that connecting people can do. And as Facebook has grown, people everywhere have gotten a powerful new tool for staying connected to the people they love, for making their voices heard, and for building communities and businesses. Just recently, we've seen the Me Too movement and the March for Our Lives organized, at least in part, on Facebook. After Hurricane Harvey, people came together to raise more than $20 million for relief. And more than 70 million small businesses use Facebook to create jobs and grow. But it's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. And that goes for fake news, foreign interference in elections, and hate speech, as well as developers and data privacy. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry. I started Facebook, I run it, and I'm responsible for what happens here. So now we have to go through all of our relationship with people and make sure that we're taking a broad enough view of our responsibility. It's not enough to just connect people. We have to make sure that those connections are positive. It's not enough to just give people a voice. We need to make sure that people aren't using it to harm other people or to spread misinformation. And it's not enough to just give people control over their information. We need to make sure that the developers they share it with protect their information too. Across the board, we have a responsibility to not just build tools, but to make sure that they're used for good. It will take some time to work through all the changes we need to make across the company, but I'm committed to getting this right. This includes the basic responsibility of protecting people's information, which we failed to do with Cambridge Analytica. So here are a few things that we are doing to address this and to prevent it from happening again. First, we're getting to the bottom of exactly what Cambridge Analytica did and telling everyone affected. What we know now is that Cambridge Analytica improperly accessed some information about millions of Facebook members by buying it from an app developer. That information, this was information that people generally share publicly on their Facebook pages, like names and their profile picture and the pages they follow. When we first contacted Cambridge Analytica, they told us that they had deleted the data. About a month ago, we heard new reports that suggested that wasn't true. And now we're working with governments in the US, the UK, and around the world to do a full audit of what they've done and to make sure they get rid of any data they may still have. Second, to make sure no other app developers out there are misusing data, we're now investigating every single app that had access to a large amount of information in the past. And if we find that someone improperly used data, we're going to ban them from Facebook and tell everyone affected. Third, to prevent this from ever happening again going forward, we're making sure that developers can access as much information now. The good news here is that we already made big changes to our platform in 2014 that would have prevented this specific situation with Cambridge Analytica from occurring again today. But there's more to do, and you can find more details on the steps we're taking in my written statement. My top priority has always been our social mission of connecting people, building community, and bringing the world closer together. Advertisers and developers will never take priority over that as long as I'm running Facebook. I started Facebook when I was in college. We've come a long way since then. We now serve more than 2 billion people around the world, and every day, people use our services to stay connected with the people that matter to them most. I believe deeply in what we're doing, and I know that when we address these challenges, we'll look back and view helping people connect and giving more people a voice as a positive force in the world. I realize the issues we're talking about today aren't just issues for Facebook and our community. They're issues and challenges for all of us as Americans. Thank you for having me here today, and I'm ready to take your questions.
Yeah, there you go, Zuckerberg.
I'll remind members that maybe weren't here when I had my opening comments that we are operating under the
5-minute rule, and that applies to
you get 5 minutes is up.
The 5-minute rule, and that applies to those of us who are chairing the committee as well.
Get him, Zuckerberg.
Facebook handles extensive amounts of personal data for billions of users. A significant amount of that data is shared with third-party developers who utilize your platform. As of early this year,
oh man, you don't
did
know
not
Facebook.
actively monitor
You don't even know nothing
whether
about
that data was transferred by such developers to other parties. Moreover, your policies only prohibit transfers by developers to parties seeking to profit from such data. Number one, besides Professor Kogan's transfer and now potentially CubeU, do you know of any instances where user data was improperly transferred to third party in breach of Facebook's terms? If so, how many times has that happened? And was Facebook only made aware of that transfer by some third party?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. As I mentioned, we're now conducting a full investigation into every single app that had access to a large amount of information before we locked down platform to prevent developers from accessing this information around 2014. We believe that we're going to be investigating many apps, tens of thousands of apps. And if we find any suspicious activity, we're going to conduct a full audit of those apps to understand how they're using their data and if they're doing anything improper. And if we find that they're doing anything improper, we'll ban them from Facebook and we will tell everyone affected. As for past activity, I don't have all the examples of apps that we've banned here, but if you'd like, I can have my team follow up with you after this.
Have you ever required an audit to ensure the deletion of improperly transferred data? And if so, how many times?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we have. I don't have the exact figure on how many times we have, but overall, the way we've enforced our platform policies in the past is we have looked at patterns of how apps have used our APIs and accessed information, as well as looked into reports that people have made to us about apps that might be doing sketchy things. Going forward, we're going to take a more proactive position on this and do much more regular spot checks and other reviews of apps, as well as increasing the amount of audits that we do. And again, I can make sure that our team follows up with you on anything about the specific past stats that would be interesting.
I was going to assume that sitting here today, you have no idea. And if I'm wrong on that, you're telling me, I think, that you're able to supply those figures to us, at least as of this point.
Mr. Chairman, I will have my team follow up with you on what information we have.
Okay, but right now you have no certainty of whether or not, how much of that's going on, right? Okay. Facebook collects massive amounts of data from consumers, including content, networks, contact lists, device information, location, and information from third parties. Yet your data policy is only a few pages long and provides consumers with only a few examples of what is collected and how it might be used. The examples given emphasize benign uses, such as connecting with friends, but your policy does not give any indication for more controversial issues of such data. My question, why doesn't Facebook disclose to its users all the ways the data might be used by Facebook and other third parties? And what is Facebook's responsibility to inform users about that information?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it's important to tell people exactly how the information that they share on Facebook is going to be used. That's why every single time you go to share something on Facebook, whether it's a photo in Facebook or a message in Messenger or WhatsApp, every single time there's a control right there about who you're going to be sharing it with, whether it's your friends or public or a specific group, and you can change that and control that in line. To your broader point about the privacy policy, this gets into an issue that I think we and others in the tech industry have found challenging, which is that long privacy policies are very confusing. And if you make it long and spell out all the detail, then you're probably going to reduce the percent of people who read it and make it accessible to them. So one of the things that we've struggled with over time is to make something that is as simple as possible so people can understand it, as well as giving them controls in line in the product in the context of when they're trying to actually use them, taking into account that we don't expect that most people will want to go through and read a full legal document.
Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday when we talked, I gave the relatively harmless example that I'm communicating with my friends on Facebook and indicate that I love a certain kind of chocolate. And all of a sudden, I start receiving advertisements for chocolate. What if I don't want to receive those commercial advertisements? So your Chief Operating Officer, Ms. Sandberg, suggested on the NBC Today show that Facebook users who do not want their personal information used for advertising might have to pay for that protection, pay for it. Are you actually considering having Facebook users pay for you not to use that information?
Senator, people have a control over how their information is used in ads in the product today. So if you want to have an experience where your ads aren't targeted using all the information that we have available, you can turn off third-party information. What we've found is that even though some people don't like ads, people really don't like ads that aren't relevant. And while there is some discomfort for sure with using information in making ads more relevant, the overwhelming feedback that we get from our community is that people would rather have us show relevant content there than not. So we offer this control that you're referencing. Some people use it. It's not the majority of people on Facebook. And I think that's a good level of control to offer. I think what Cheryl was saying was that in order to not run ads at all, we would still need some sort of business model.
And that is your business model. So I take it that, and I use the harmless example of chocolate, but if it got into more personal thing, communicating with friends, and I want to cut it off, I'm going to have to pay you in order not to send me, using my personal information, something that I don't want. That, in essence, is what I understood Ms. Sandberg to say. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator. Although, to be clear, we don't offer an option today for people to pay to not show ads. We think offering an ad-supported service is the most aligned with our mission of trying to help connect everyone in the world. Because we want to offer a free service that everyone can afford.
Okay.
That's the only way that we can reach billions of people.
So, therefore, you consider my personally identifiable data the company's data, not my data. Is that it?
No, Senator. Actually, at the first line of our terms of service say that you control and own the information and content that you put on Facebook.
Well, the recent scandal is obviously frustrating, not only because it affected 87 million, but because it seems to be part of a pattern of lax data practices by the company going back years. So back in 2011, it was a settlement with the FTC, and now we discover yet another instance where the data was failed to be protected. When you discovered the Cambridge Analytica that had fraudulently obtained all of this information, why didn't you inform those 87 million?
When we learned in 2015 that Cambridge Analytica had bought data from an app developer on Facebook that people had shared it with, we did take action. We took down the app and we demanded that both the app developer and Cambridge Analytica delete and stop using any data that they had. They told us that they did this. In retrospect, it was clearly a mistake to believe them. And we should have followed up and done a full audit then. And that is not a mistake that we will make.
Yes, you did that, and you apologized for it. but you didn't notify them. And do you think that you have an ethical obligation to notify 87 million Facebook users?
Senator, when we heard back from Cambridge Analytica that they had told us that they weren't using the data and had deleted it, we considered it a closed case. In retrospect, that was clearly a mistake. We shouldn't have taken their word for it, and we've updated our policies and how we're going to operate the company to make sure that we don't make that mistake again.
Did anybody notify the FTC?
No, Senator, for the same reason that we considered it a closed case.
Senator Thune.
And Mr. Zuckerberg, would you do that differently today, presumably? That in response to Senator Nelson's question?
Yes.
Having to do it over. This may be your first appearance before Congress, but it's not the first time that Facebook has faced tough questions about its privacy policies. Wired Magazine recently noted that you have a 14-year history of apologizing for ill-advised decisions regarding user privacy, not unlike the one that you made just now in your opening statement. After more than a decade of promises to do better, how is today's apology different? And why should we trust Facebook to make the necessary changes to ensure user privacy and give people a clearer picture of your privacy policies?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have made a lot of mistakes in running the company. I think it's pretty much impossible, I believe, to start a company in your dorm room and then grow it to be at the scale that we're at now without making some mistakes. And because our service is about helping people connect and information, those mistakes have been different in how we try not to make the same mistake multiple times, but in general, a lot of the mistakes are around how people connect to each other just because of the nature of the service. Overall, I would say that we're going through a broader philosophical shift in how we approach our responsibility as a company. For the first 10 or 12 years of the company, I viewed our responsibility as primarily building tools that if we could put those tools in people's hands, then that would empower people to do good things. What I think we've learned now across a number of issues, not just data privacy, but also fake news and foreign interference in elections, is that we need to take a more proactive role and a broader view of our responsibility. It's not enough to just build tools. We need to make sure that they're used for good. And that means that we need to now take a more active view in policing the ecosystem and in watching and kind of looking out and making sure that all of the members in our community are using these tools in a way that's going to be good and healthy. So at the end of the day, this is going to be something where people will measure us by our results on this. It's not that I expect that anything I say here today to necessarily change people's view, but I'm committed to getting this right. And I believe that over the coming years, once we fully work all these solutions through, people will see real differences.
Well, and I'm glad that you all have gotten that message. As we discussed in my office yesterday, the line between legitimate political discourse and hate speech can sometimes be hard to identify, and especially when you're relying on artificial intelligence and other technologies for the initial discovery. Can you discuss what steps that Facebook currently takes when making these evaluations, the challenges that you face, and any examples of where you may draw the line between what is and what is not hate speech?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'll speak to hate speech, and then I'll talk about enforcing our content policies more broadly. So actually, maybe if you're okay with it, I'll go in the other order. So from the beginning of the company in 2004, I started in my dorm room. It was me and my roommate. We didn't have AI technology that could look at the content that people were sharing. So we basically had to enforce our content policies reactively. People could share what they wanted, and then if someone in the community found it to be offensive or against our policies, they'd flag it for us and we'd look at it reactively. Now, increasingly, we are developing AI tools that can identify certain classes of bad activity proactively and flag it for our team at Facebook. By the end of this year, by the way, we're going to have more than 20,000 people working on security and content review, working across all these things. So when content gets flagged to us, we have those people look at it, and if it violates our policies, then we take it down. Some problems lend themselves more easily to AI solutions than others. So hate speech is one of the hardest, because determining if something is hate speech is very linguistically nuanced, right? You need to understand, what is a slur and whether something is hateful, not just in English, but the majority of people on Facebook use it in languages that are different across the world. Contrast that, for example, with an area like finding terrorist propaganda, which we've actually been very successful at deploying AI tools on already. Today, as we sit here, 99% of the ISIS and Al-Qaeda content that we take down on Facebook, our AI systems flag before any human sees it. So that's a success in terms of rolling out AI tools that can proactively police and enforce safety across the community. Hate speech, I am optimistic that over a 5 to 10 year period, we will have AI tools that can get into some of the nuances, the linguistic nuances of different types of content to be more accurate in flagging things for our systems. But today, we're just not there on that. So a lot of this is still reactive. People flag it to us. We have people look at it. We have policies to try to make it as not subjective as possible. But until we get it more automated, there's a higher error rate than I'm happy with.
Thank you. Senator Feinstein.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, what is Facebook doing to prevent foreign actors from interfering in U.S. elections?
Thank you, Senator. This is one of my top priorities in 2018, is to get this right. One of my greatest regrets in running the company is that we were slow in identifying the Russian information operations in 2016. We expected them to do a number of more traditional cyber attacks, which we did identify and notify the campaigns that they were trying to hack into them, but we were slow at identifying the type of new information operations.
When did you identify new operations?
It was right around the time of the 2016 election itself. So since then, 2018 is an incredibly important year for elections, not just with the US midterms, but around the world. There are important elections in India, in Brazil, in Mexico, in Pakistan, and in Hungary that we want to make sure that we do everything we can to protect the integrity of those elections. Now, I have more confidence that we're going to get this right because since the 2016 election, there have been several important elections around the world where we've had a better record. There's the French presidential election, there's the German election, there was the US Senate Alabama special election last year.
Explain what is better about the record.
So we've deployed new AI tools that do a better job of identifying fake accounts that may be trying to interfere in elections or spread misinformation. And between those three elections, we were able to proactively remove tens of thousands of accounts that before they could contribute significant harm. And the nature of these attacks, though, is that there are people in Russia whose job it is to try to exploit our systems and other internet systems and other systems as well. So this is an arms race, right? I mean, they're going to keep on getting better at this, and we need to invest in keeping on getting better at this too, which is why one of the things I mentioned before is we're going to have more than 20,000 people by the end of this year working on security and content review across the company.
Speak for a moment about automated bots that spread disinformation. What are you doing to punish those who exploit your platform in that regard?
Well, you're not allowed to have a fake account on Facebook. Your content has to be authentic. So we build technical tools to try to identify when people are creating fake accounts, especially large networks of fake accounts like the Russians have, in order to remove all of that content. After the 2016 election, our top priority was protecting the integrity of other elections around the world. But at the same time, we had a parallel effort to trace back to Russia the IRA activity, the Internet Research Agency activity. That was the part of the Russian government that did this activity in 2016. And just last week, we were able to determine that a number of Russian media organizations that were sanctioned by the Russian regulator were operated and controlled by this Internet Research Agency. So we took the step last week. It was a pretty big step for us of taking down sanctioned news organizations in Russia as part of an operation to remove 270 fake accounts and pages, part of their broader network in Russia. That was actually not targeting international interference as much as, I'm sorry, let me correct that. It was primarily targeting spreading misinformation in Russia itself, as well as certain Russian-speaking neighboring countries.
How many accounts of this type have you taken down?
Across, in the IRA specifically, the ones that we've pegged back to the IRA, we can identify the 470 in the American elections and the 270 that we specifically went after in Russia last week. There are many others that our systems catch, which are more difficult to attribute specifically to Russian intelligence. But the number would be in the tens of thousands of fake accounts that we remove. And I'm happy to have my team follow up with you on more information if that would be helpful.
Would you please? I think this is very important. If you knew in 2015 that Cambridge Analytica was using the information of Professor Kogan's, why didn't Facebook ban Cambridge in 2015? Why'd you wait?
Senator, that's a great question. Cambridge Analytica wasn't using our services in 2015, as far as we can tell. So this is clearly one of the questions that I asked our team as soon as I learned about this: is why did we wait until we found out about the reports last month to ban them? It's because as of the time that we learned about their activity in 2015, they weren't an advertiser, they weren't running pages, so we actually had nothing to ban.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Feinstein. Now, Senator Hatch.
Well, in my opinion, this is the most intense public scrutiny I've seen for a tech-related hearing since the Microsoft hearing that I chaired back in the late 1990s. The recent stories about Cambridge Analytica and data mining on social media have raised serious concerns about consumer privacy. And naturally, I know you understand that. At the same time, these stories touch on the very foundation of the internet economy and the way the websites that drive our internet economy make money. Some have professed themselves shocked that companies like Facebook and Google share user data with advertisers. Did any of these individuals ever stop to ask themselves why Facebook and Google don't charge for access? Nothing in life is free. Everything involves trade-offs. If you want something without having to pay money for it, you're going to have to pay for it in some other way, it seems to me. And that's what we're seeing here. And these great websites that don't charge for access, they extract value in some other way. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as they're upfront about what they're doing. In my mind, the issue here is transparency. It's consumer choice. Do users understand what they're agreeing to when they access a website or agree to terms of service? Are websites upfront about how they extract value from users, or do they hide the ball? The consumers have the information they need to make an informed choice regarding whether or not to visit a particular website. To my mind, these are questions that we should ask or be focusing on. Now, Mr. Zuckerberg, I remember well your first visit to Capitol Hill back in 2010. You spoke to the Senate Republican High-Tech Task Force, which I chair. You said back then that Facebook would always be free. Is that still your objective?
Senator, yes, there will always be a version of Facebook that is free. It is our mission to try to help connect everyone around the world and to bring the world closer together. In order to do that, we believe that we need to offer a service that everyone can afford, and we're committed to doing that.
Well, if so, how do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?
Senator, we run ads.
I see. That's great. Whenever a controversy like this arises, there's always a danger that Congress's response will be to step in and overregulate. Now, that's been the experience that I've had in my 42 years here. In your view, what sorts of legislative changes would help to solve the problems the Cambridge Analytica story has revealed? And what sorts of legislative changes would not help to solve this issue?
What kind of idiot is this?
Senator, I think that there are a few categories of legislation that make sense to consider. Around privacy specifically, there are a few principles that I think it would be useful to discuss and potentially codify into law. One is around having a simple and practical set of ways that you explain what you're doing with data. And we talked a little bit earlier around the complexity of laying out this long privacy policy. It's hard to say that people fully understand something when it's only written out in a long legal document. The stuff needs to be implemented in a way where people can actually understand it, where consumers can understand it, but that can also capture all the nuances of how these services work in a way that's not overly restrictive on providing the services. So that's one. The second is around giving people complete control. This is the most important principle for Facebook. Every piece of content that you share on Facebook, you own, and you have complete control over who sees it and how you share it, and you can remove it at any time. That's why every day, about 100 billion times a day, people come to one of our services and either post a photo or send a message to someone because they know that they have that control, and that who they say it's going to go to is going to be who sees the content. And I think that control is something that's important that I think should apply to every service. And
go ahead.
The third point is just around enabling innovation, because some of these use cases that are very sensitive, like face recognition, for example. And I think that there's a balance that's extremely important to strike here, where you obtain special consent for sensitive features like face recognition, but we still need to make it so that American companies can innovate in those areas, or else we're going to fall behind Chinese competitors and others around the world who have different regimes for different new features like that.
Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Zuckerberg. Do you know who Palantir is?
I do.
Some people have referred to them as Stanford Analytica. Do you agree?
Senator, I have not heard that.
Okay. Do you think Palantir taught Cambridge Analytica, as press reports are saying, how to do these tactics?
Senator, I don't know.
Right. How would he know that?
Do you think that Palantir has ever scraped data from Facebook?
Senator, I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Do you think that during the 2016 campaign, as Cambridge Analytica was providing support to the Trump campaign under Project Alamo, were there any Facebook people involved in that sharing of technique and information?
Senator, we provided support to the Trump campaign similar to what we provide to any advertiser or campaign who asks for it.
So that was a yes. Is that a yes?
Senator, can you repeat the specific question? I just want to make sure I get specifically what you're asking.
During the 2016 campaign, Cambridge Analytica worked with the Trump campaign to refine tactics, and were Facebook employees involved in that?
Senator, I don't know that our employees were involved with Cambridge Analytica, although I know that we did help out the Trump campaign overall in sales support in the same way that we do with other campaigns.
So they may have been involved in all working together during that time period. Maybe that's something your investigation will find out.
Senator, I can certainly have my team get back to you on any specifics there that I don't know sitting here today.
Have you heard of total information awareness? You know what I'm talking about?
No, I do not.
Okay. Total information awareness was 2003. John Ashcroft and others trying to do similar things to what I think is behind all of this. Geopolitical forces trying to get data and information to influence a process. So when I look at Palantir and what they're doing, and I look at WhatsApp, which is another acquisition, and I look at where you are from the 2011 consent decree and where you are today, I'm thinking, is this guy outfoxing the foxes, or is he going along with what is a major trend in an information age to try to harvest information for political forces? And so my question to you is, do you see that those applications, that those companies, Palantir and even WhatsApp, are going to fall into the same situation that you've just fallen into over the last several years?
Get him, Mark Zuckerberg.
Senator, I'm not sure specifically. Overall, I do think that these issues around information access are challenging. To the specifics about those apps, I'm not really that familiar with what Palantir does. WhatsApp collects very little information, and I think is less likely to have the kind of issues because of the way that the service is architected. But certainly, I think that these are broad issues across the tech industry.
Well, I guess given the track record of where Facebook is and why you're here today, I guess people would say that they didn't act boldly enough. And the fact that people like John Bolton basically was an investor in New York Times article earlier, I guess it was actually last month, that the Bolton PAC was obsessed with how America was becoming limp-wristed and spineless and had wanted research and messaging for national security issues. So the fact that there are a lot of people who are interested in this larger effort. And what I think my constituents want to know is, was this discussed at your board meetings? And what are the applications and interests that are being discussed without putting real teeth into this? We don't want to come back to this situation again. I believe you have all the talent. My question is whether you have all the will to help us solve this problem.
Yes, Senator. So data privacy and foreign interference in elections are certainly topics that we have discussed at the board meeting. These are some of the biggest issues that the company has faced, and we feel a huge responsibility to get these right.
Do you believe the European regulations should be applied here in the US?
Senator, I think everyone in the world deserves good privacy protection. And regardless of whether we implement the exact same regulation, I would guess that it would be somewhat different because we have somewhat different sensibilities in the US as to other countries. We're committed to rolling out the controls and the affirmative consent and the special controls around sensitive types of technology like face recognition that are required in GDPR. We're doing that around the world. So I think it's certainly worth discussing whether we should have something similar in the US. But what I would like to say today is that we're going to go forward and implement that regardless of what the regulatory outcome is.
Senator Wicker. Senator Thune will chair next. Senator Wicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for being with us. My question is going to be sort of a follow-up on what Senator Hatch was talking about. And let me agree with basically his advice that we don't want to overregulate to the point where we're stifling innovation and investment. I understand with regard to suggested rules or suggested legislation, there are at least two schools of thought out there. One would be the ISPs, the Internet Service Providers, who are advocating for privacy protections for consumers that apply to all online entities equally across the entire internet ecosystem. Now, Facebook is an edge provider on the other hand. It's my understanding that many edge providers, such as Facebook, may not support that effort because edge providers have different business models than the ISPs and should not be considered like services. So do you think we need consistent privacy protections for consumers across the entire internet ecosystem that are based on the type of consumer information being collected, used, or shared, regardless of the entity doing the collecting or using or sharing?
Senator, this is an important question. I would differentiate between ISPs, which I consider to be the pipes of the internet, and the platforms like Facebook or Google or Twitter, YouTube, that are the apps or platforms on top of that. I think in general, the expectations that people have of the pipes are somewhat different from the platforms. So there might be areas where there needs to be more regulation in one and less in the other, but I think that there are going to be other places where there needs to be more regulation of the other type. Specifically, though, on the pipes, one of the important issues that I think we face and have debated is
when you say pipes, you mean
ISPs.
The ISPs.
Yeah. And I know net neutrality has been a hotly debated topic. And one of the reasons why I have been out there saying that I think that that should be the case is because I look at my own story of when I was getting started building Facebook at Harvard. I only had one option for an ISP to use, and if I had to pay extra in order to make it so that my app could potentially be seen or used by other people, then we probably wouldn't be here today.
Okay, but we're talking about privacy concerns, and let me just say we'll have to follow up on this. But I think you and I agree this is going to be one of the major items of debate if we have to go forward and do this from a governmental standpoint. Let me just move on to another couple of items. Is it true that, as was recently publicized, that Facebook collects the call and text histories of its users that use Android phones?
Senator, we have an app called Messenger for sending messages to your Facebook friends. And that app offers people an option to sync their text messages into the messaging app and to make it so that, so you can have one app where it has both your texts and your Facebook messages in one place. We also allow people the option of
you can opt in or out of that.
Yes,
it is opt
out. It is opt in. You have to affirmatively say that you want to sync that information before we get access.
Unless you opt in, you don't collect that call and text history.
That is correct.
And is that true for? Is this practice done at all with minors, or do you make an exception there for persons aged 13 to 17?
I do not know. We can follow up.
Okay, do that. Let's do that. One other thing. There have been reports that Facebook can track a user's internet browsing activity even after that user has logged off of the Facebook platform. Can you confirm whether or not this is true?
Senator, I want to make sure I get this accurate, so it would probably be better to have my team follow up.
So you don't know?
I know that people use cookies on the internet, and that you can probably correlate activity between sessions. We do that for a number of reasons, including security and including measuring ads to make sure that the ad experiences are most effective, which of course people can opt out of. But I want to make sure that I'm precise in my answer. So
when you get back to me, sir, would you also let us know how Facebook discloses to its users that engaging in this type of tracking gives us that result?
Yes.
And thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. Senator Leahy's up next.
Thank you. Zuckerberg, I assume Facebook's been served with subpoenas from the special counsel Mueller's office. Is that correct?
Yes.
Have you or anyone at Facebook been interviewed by the special counsel's office?
Yes.
Have you been interviewed?
I have not. I have not.
Others have.
I believe so. And I want to be careful here because that our work with the special is confidential, and I want to make sure that in an open session, I'm not revealing something that's confidential.
I understand. I just want to make clear that you have been contacted, you have had subpoenas.
Actually, let me clarify that. I actually am not aware of a subpoena. I believe that there may be, but I know we're working with them.
Thank you. 6 months ago, your general counsel promised us that you were taking steps to prevent Facebook from serving what I would call an unwitting co-conspirator in Russian interference. But these unverified divisive pages are on Facebook today. They look a lot like the anonymous groups the Russian agents used to spread propaganda during the 2016 election. Are you able to confirm whether they're Russian-created groups? Yes or no?
Senator, are you asking about those specifically?
Yes.
Senator, last week, we actually announced a major change to our ads and pages policies that we will be verifying the identity of every single advertiser.
Specific ones. Do you know whether they are?
I am not familiar with those pieces of content specifically.
But if you decided this policy a week ago, you'd be able to verify them?
We are working on that now. what we're doing is we're going to verify the identity of any advertiser who's running a political or issue-related ad. This is basically what the Honest Ads Act is proposing, and we're following that. And we're also going to do that for pages.
Did you get an answer on these?
I'm not familiar with those specific cases.
Will you find out the answer and get back to me?
I'll have my team get back to you. I do think it's worth adding, though, that we're going to do the same verification of the identity and location of admins who are running large pages. So that way, even if they aren't going to be buying ads in our system, that will make it significantly harder for Russian interference efforts or other inauthentic efforts to try to spread misinformation through the network.
It's a fight that's been going on for some time. Some might say that's about time. 6 months ago, I asked your general counsel about Facebook's role as a breeding ground for hate speech against Rohingya refugees. Recently, UN investigators blamed Facebook for playing a role in citing possible genocide in Myanmar, and there has been genocide there. Now, you say you used AI to find this. This is the type of content I'm referring to. It calls for the death of a Muslim journalist. Now, that threat went straight through your detection systems. It spread very quickly. And then it took attempt after attempt after attempt and the involvement of civil society groups to get you to remove it. Why couldn't it be removed within 24 hours?
Senator, what's happening in Myanmar is a terrible tragedy, and we need to do more.
We all agree with that.
Okay.
But UN investigators have blamed, you blame Facebook for playing a role in the genocide. We all agree it's terrible. How can you dedicate, and will you dedicate the resources to make sure such hate speech is taken down within 24 hours?
Yes, we're working on this. And there are 3 specific things that we're doing. One is we're hiring dozens of more Burmese language content reviewers because hate speech is very language specific. It's hard to do it without people who speak the local language, and we need to ramp up our effort there dramatically. Second is we're working with civil society in Myanmar to identify specific hate figures so we can take down their accounts rather than specific pieces of content. And third is we're standing up a product team to do specific product changes in Myanmar and other countries that may have similar issues in the future to prevent this from happening.
Senator Cruz and I sent a letter to Apple asking what they're going to do about Chinese censorship. My question, I'll place it.
That'd be great. Thank you, Senator Lake.
Place for the record, I want to know what you will do about Chinese censorship when they come to you.
Senator Graham's up next.
Thank you. Are you familiar with Andrew Bosworth?
Yes, Senator, I am.
He said, so we connect more people, maybe someone dies in a terrorist attack, coordinated on our tools. The ugly truth is that we believe in connecting people so deeply that anything that allows us to connect more people more often is de facto good. Do you agree with that?
No, Senator, I do not. And as context, Boz wrote that. Boz is what we call him internally. He wrote that as an internal note. We have a lot of discussion internally. I disagreed with it at the time that he wrote it. If you looked at the comments on the internal discussion, the vast majority of people internally did too.
That you did a poor job as a CEO communicating your displeasure with such thoughts. Because if he had understood where you were at, he would never said it to begin with.
Well, Senator, we try to run our company in a way where people can express different opinions internally.
Well, this is an opinion that really disturbs me. And if somebody worked for me that said this, I'd fire him. Who's your biggest competitor?
Senator, we have a lot of competitors.
Who's your biggest?
I think the categories of, do you want just one? I'm not sure I can give one, but can I give a bunch?
Mm-hmm.
So there are 3 categories that I would focus on. One are the other tech platforms. So Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, we overlap with them in different ways.
Do they provide the same service you provide?
In different ways, different
Let me
parts
put
of
it
it,
this
yes.
way. If I buy a Ford and it doesn't work well and I don't like it, I can buy a Chevy. If I'm upset with Facebook, what's the equivalent product that I can go sign up for?
Well, there's the second category that I was going to talk about.
I'm not talking about categories. I'm talking about is there real competition you face? Because car companies face a lot of competition. If they make a defective car, it gets out in the world, people stop buying that car, they buy another one. Is there an alternative to Facebook in the private sector?
Yes, Senator. The average American uses 8 different apps to communicate with their friends and stay in touch with people, ranging from texting apps to email.
The same service you provide.
Well, we provide a number of different services.
Is Twitter the same as what you do?
It overlaps with a portion of what we do.
You don't think you have a monopoly?
It certainly doesn't feel like that to me.
Okay. So it doesn't. So Instagram, you bought Instagram. Why did you buy Instagram?
Because they were very talented app developers who were making good use of our platform and understood our values.
It was a good business decision. My point is that one way to regulate a company is through competition, through government regulation. Here's the question that all of us got to answer. What do we tell our constituents, given what's happened here, why we should let you self-regulate? What would you tell people in South Carolina that, given all the things we've just discovered here, it's a good idea for us to rely upon you to regulate your own business practices?
Well, Senator, my position is not that there should be no regulation. Okay. I think the internet is increasingly
You embrace regulation?
I think the real question, as the internet becomes more important in people's lives, is what is the right regulation, not whether there should be or not.
You as a company welcome regulation?
I think if it's the right regulation, then yes.
You think the Europeans have it right?
I think that they get things right.
Have you ever submitted? That's true. So would you work with us in terms of what regulations you think are necessary in your industry?
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you submit to us some proposed regulations?
Yes, and I'll have my team follow up with you so that way we can have this discussion across the different categories where I think that this discussion needs to happen.
Look forward to it. When you sign up for Facebook, you sign up for terms of service. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. It says the terms govern your use of Facebook and the products, features, apps, services, technology, software we offer, Facebook's products or products, except where we expressly state that separate terms and not these apply. I'm a lawyer, I have no idea what that means. But when you look at terms of service, this is what you get. Do you think the average consumer understands what they're signing up for?
I don't think that the average person likely reads that whole document, but I think that there are different ways that we can communicate that and have a responsibility to do so.
Do you agree with me that you better come up with different ways because this ain't working?
No. Well, Senator, I think in certain areas that is true. And I think in other areas, like the core part of what we do, right? If you think about just at the most basic level, people come to Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger about 100 billion times a day to share a piece of content or a message with a specific set of people.
Can they get somebody
I think
under
that
the age
basic
of 75
functionality, people understand because we
to
have the
ask
controls in line
questions?
every time. And
none of
given
these guys probably
the
even got a
volume
Facebook account,
of the
never been on
activity
it,
and the
don't know
value
how it
that people tell us that they're getting from that, I think that control in line does seem to be working fairly well. Now, we can always do better. And there are the services are complex and there is more to it than just, you go and you post a photo. So I agree that in many places we could do better. But I think for the core of the service, it actually is quite clear.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, I think we all agree that what happened here was bad. You acknowledged it was a breach of trust. And the way I explain it to my constituents is that if someone breaks into my apartment with a crowbar and they take my stuff, it is just like if the manager gave them the keys or if they didn't have any locks on the doors, it's still a breach. It's still a break-in. And I believe we need to have laws and rules that are sophisticated as the brilliant products that you've developed here. And we just haven't done that yet. And one of the areas that I focused on is the election. And I appreciate the support that you and Facebook and now Twitter actually have given to the Honest Ads Act, a bill that you mentioned that I'm leading with Senator McCain and Senator Warner. And I just want to be clear, as we work to pass this law, so that we have the same rules in place to disclose political ads and issue ads as we do for TV and radio, as well as disclaimers, that you're going to take early action as soon as June, I heard, before this election, so that people can view these ads, including issue ads. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator. And I just want to take a moment before I go into this in more detail to thank you for your leadership on this. This, I think, is an important area for the whole industry to move on. The two specific things that we're doing are, one is around transparency. So now you're going to be able to go and click on any advertiser or any page on Facebook and see all of the ads that they're running. So that actually brings advertising online on Facebook to an even higher standard than what you would have on TV or print media, because there's nowhere where you can see all of the TV ads that someone is running, for example, whereas you will be able to see now on Facebook whether this campaign or third party is saying different messages to different types of people. I think that that's a really important element of transparency. Mm-hmm. Then the other really important piece is around verifying every single advertiser who's going to be running political or issue ads.
I appreciate that. And Senator Warner and I have also called on Google and the other platforms to do the same. So memo to the rest of you, we have to get this done, or we're going to have a patchwork of ads. And I hope that you'll be working with us to pass this bill. Is that right?
We will.
Okay, thank you. Now on the subject of Cambridge Analytica, were these people, the 87 million people, users, concentrated in certain states? Are you able to figure out where they're from?
I do not have that information with me, but we can follow up with your office.
Okay, because as we know, that election was close and it was only thousands of votes in certain states. You've also estimated that roughly 126 million people may have been shown content from a Facebook page associated with the Internet Research Agency. Have you determined whether any of those people were the same Facebook users whose data was shared with Cambridge Analytica? Are you able to make that determination?
Senator, we're investigating that now. We believe that it is entirely possible that there will be a connection there.
Okay, that seems like a big deal as we look back at that last election. Former Cambridge Analytica employee Christopher Wiley has said that the data that it improperly obtained, that Cambridge Analytica improperly obtained from Facebook users, could be stored in Russia. Do you agree that that's a possibility?
Sorry, are you asking if Cambridge Analytica's data could be stored in Russia?
That's what he said this weekend on a Sunday show.
Senator, I don't have any specific knowledge that would suggest that, but one of the steps that we need to take now is go do a full audit of all of Cambridge Analytica's systems to understand what they're doing, whether they still have any data, to make sure that they remove all the data. If they don't, we're going to take legal action against them to do so. That audit, we have temporarily seeded that in order to let the UK government complete their government investigation first, because of course the government investigation takes precedence over a company doing that. But we are committed to completing this full audit and getting to the bottom of what's going on here, so that way we can have more answers to this.
Okay, you earlier stated publicly and here that you would support some privacy rules so that everyone's playing by the same rules here. And you also said here that you should have notified customers earlier. Would you support a rule that would require you to notify your users of a breach within 72 hours?
Senator, that makes sense to me. And I think we should have our team follow up with yours to discuss the details around that more.
Thank you. I just think part of this was when people don't even know that their data has been breached, that's a huge problem. And I also think we get to solutions faster when we get that information out there. Thank you. And we look forward to passing this bill. We'd love to pass it before the election on the honest ads, and looking forward to better disclosure of this election. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Blunt's up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, nice to see you. When I saw you not too long after I entered the Senate in 2011, I told you when I sent my business cards down to be printed, they came back from the Senate print shop with a message that was the first business card they'd ever printed a Facebook address on. There are days when I've regretted that, but more days when we get lots of information that we need to get. There are days when I wonder if Facebook Friends is a little misstated. It doesn't seem like I have those every single day. But the platform you've created is really important. Now, my son Charlie, who's 13, is dedicated to Instagram, so he'd want to be sure I mentioned him while I was here with you. I haven't printed that on my card yet. I will say that, but I think we have that account as well. Lots of ways to connect people, and the information obviously is an important commodity, and it's what makes your business work. I get that. However, I wonder about some of the collection efforts, and maybe we can go through largely just even yes and no, and then we'll get back to more expansive discussion of this. But do you collect user data through cross-device tracking?
Senator, I believe we do link people's accounts between devices in order to make sure that their Facebook and Instagram and their other experiences can be synced between their devices.
And that would also include that complicated to me. Now, you understand this better than I do, but maybe you can explain to me to the device that they use their Facebook connection, but not necessarily connect Facebook.
I'm not sure is necessary to
device tracking as one of their concerns. Generally, that people are tracking devices that collection methods. Is that all in this document that I would see and agree to before I?
Since be exhaustive, can configure their experience the way that they want.
So do people now give you permission to track specific devices in their contract? And if they do, is that a relatively new addition to what you do?
Senator, I'm sorry, I don't have that.
Am I able to opt out? Am I able to say it's okay for you to track what I'm saying on Facebook, but I don't want you to track what I'm texting to somebody else off Facebook on an Android?
Oh, okay. Yes, Senator. In general, Facebook is not collecting data from other apps that you use. There may be some specific things of the device that you're using that Facebook needs to understand in order to offer the service. But if you're using Google or you're using the mobile operating systems are architected.
You don't have bundled permissions for how I can agree to what devices I may use that you may have contact with?
Y'all can make donations.
Did you bundle that permission, or am I able to one individually say what I'm willing for you to watch and what I don't want you to watch? And I think we may have to take that for the record based on everybody else's time.
Thank you, Senator Blunt. Next up, Senator Durbin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
If you've messaged anybody this week, would you share with us the names of the people you've messaged?
Senator, no, I would probably not choose to do that publicly here.
I think that may be what this is all about. Your right to privacy, the limits of your right to privacy, and how much you give away in modern America in the name of, quote, connecting people around the world. The question basically of what information Facebook's collecting, who they're sending it to, and whether they ever asked me in advance my permission to do that. Is that a fair thing for a user of Facebook to expect?
Yes, Senator. I think everyone should have control over how their information is used. And as we've talked about in some of the other questions, I think that is laid out in some of the documents. But more importantly, you want to give people control in the product itself. So the most important way that this happens across our services is that every day people come to our services to choose to share photos or send messages. And every single time they choose to share something, they have a control right there about who they want to share it with. But that level of control is extremely important.
They certainly know within the Facebook pages who their friends are, but they may not know, as has happened.
All right, Mark Zuckerberg under fire right now, speaking of the Senate. He is going to be doing